Hello and welcome to the Calyptix Gatekeeper video walkthrough. At the time of this video, the current AccessEnforcer firmware is 5.0.3. This video will be broken up into chapters and you will find the timestamps below in the description. Before we get started, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you'll be alerted when new webinars and training videos are available. Thank you for your support. Introduction to Gatekeeper. What is Gatekeeper? Gatekeeper is a tool developed by Calyptix exclusively for the AccessEnforcer UTM firewall to provide remote capabilities to the network and its resources with multi-factor authentication without the need for any additional software for the end user. In our immediate use case, we'll be using it for remote desktop protocols so we can grant users access to workstations without exposing the network with open ports or using a VPN. How do we do that? We use a short-lived, single-use firewall rule that comes into existence when the user initiates the connection. As soon as the connection is established, the firewall rule vanishes and in turn closes the port and is unable to be detected by any outside system, thus securing the network while giving access. Preparing the environment. Before setting up Gatekeeper, it is best to prepare your systems to help ensure a smooth setup and seamless experience for both yourself and your users. Specifically, there are 3 things you should look at: preparing the Gatekeeper end-user URL, preparing your user's workstation for RDP access, and preparing your user's workstation's IP addresses. The Gatekeeper end-user URL is the public internet accessible URL that the end users will visit to use Gatekeeper. It must be a public and internet accessible URL, be on a valid domain, have a valid SSL certificate, not self-signed, be on a public static IP address that does not change. The main thing to decide is whether you would like to host your Gatekeeper end-user URL using the same DNS name as your AccessEnforcer GUI, which brings us to the options available to you. Option 1, Gatekeeper end-user URL with the same DNS name as the AccessEnforcer GUI. This is the most straightforward option. For example, suppose you currently access your AccessEnforcer GUI with this address. Your Gatekeeper end-user URL could be hosted at the same DNS name but on a different port, like this. This option is the one we recommend taking if you would like an easier setup. There are a few requirements if you would like to use this option. If you currently use an IP address to access your AccessEnforcer GUI, you will need to use a DNS name instead, like in the previous example. You will need to set up a public DNS record to ensure that the DNS name resolves to your AccessEnforcer's WAN IP address where the GUI and Gatekeeper end-user URL are hosted. Setting up a public DNS record is done on your domain's DNS host, not on AccessEnforcer. You will need a valid SSL certificate issued by a certificate authority for the DNS name. We do not recommend self-signed certificates. We will briefly go over Let's Encrypt setup and benefits. Free domain validation certificate that renews automatically every 90 days. Easy to complete. Requires a DNS record subdomain that points to the public IP address of the AccessEnforcer. If you have multiple WAN IP addresses, select the one you want to use with Gatekeeper for this purpose. Calyptix AccessEnforcers ship with a self-signed certificate. When you navigate to the web interface via an IP address in the web browser, you may be shown a warning that the certificate is not trusted. We will walk through the process of obtaining a free Let's Encrypt domain validation certificate that you can pair with a fully qualified domain name so that you can log into an AccessEnforcer securely using that fully qualified domain name. Locate the public IP address of the firewall. This is most easily available when you log into the AccessEnforcer you are working on and navigate to the Home System Status page. If you have more than one public IP address, select the one you want to use. Log into your DNS hosts, for example, GoDaddy, Network Solutions, Cloudflare, Google, etc. Choose a name for the subdomain and add it as an A record. An A record is most common, however you are free to choose another type of association as necessary. Enter the public IP address of the firewall as the value for the A record. The default TTL is generally acceptable, but customize according to your needs. Save the A record and wait for the DNS IP address association to propagate. When an attempt to ping your fully qualified domain name successfully directs you to the proper IP address, you are ready for the next step. Log into your AccessEnforcer and navigate to the Setup, Network, Domain Name, and Certificates. Add the fully qualified domain name you created to the Add Domain field. Check the box for the domain name used for the AccessEnforcer UI and click Save. Next, click Request Let's Encrypt Certificates. If successful, you will receive the following notice. Click OK to continue. Your Let's Encrypt certificate will automatically renew itself every 90 days and requires no manual intervention. If you receive the following type of error, you do not wait long enough for the IP address fully qualified domain name association to propagate. Once completed, you can access the AccessEnforcer GUI with a fully qualified domain name. The Gatekeeper end user URL needs to be on a port that is different from your AccessEnforcer's GUI. You can use port 443 for your Gatekeeper end user URL if you wish. Option 2, Gatekeeper end user URL on a different DNS name as the AccessEnforcer GUI. If you prefer, you could set up the Gatekeeper end user URL on a DNS name that is different from your AccessEnforcer's GUI. For example, suppose your current AccessEnforcer GUI is at this address. Your Gatekeeper end user URL could be hosted at a different DNS name like this. There are a few requirements if you would like to use this option. You will need to set up a public DNS record to ensure that the DNS name resolves to your AccessEnforcer's WAN IP address where the Gatekeeper end user URL is hosted. Now let's prepare your users' workstations for RDP access. If your users will be using Gatekeeper to access their workstations using RDP, you will need to ensure that their accounts are allowed to connect to the RDP service on their workstations. You can configure your PC for remote access with a few easy steps on Windows 10 Professional. On the device you want to connect to, open the Start menu and then click the Settings icon on the left. Select the system group and scroll the left menu down to Remote Desktop. Use the slider to enable Remote Desktop. It is also recommended to keep the PC awake and discoverable to facilitate connections. Click Show Settings to enable. As needed, add users who can connect remotely by clicking Select Users that can remotely access the PC. Members of the Administrators group automatically have access. Make note of the name of this PC under How to connect to this PC. You will need this to configure the clients. Preparing your users' workstations IP addresses. Gatekeeper rules allow access to users' workstation by IP address. If the IP addresses of the workstations are assigned by DHCP, they may change, especially if the user turns off their workstations for a long time before turning them on again. Future versions of Gatekeeper may allow users' workstations to be specified by computer name instead of IP address. For now, it is best to set up your workstation so that the IP addresses do not change, either by using DHCP reservations to ensure the user's workstation uses the same IP address every time they request a lease, or using static IP addresses for the workstations. Create a portal. The starting point of Gatekeeper is a portal. A Gatekeeper portal is a link to your identity provider, either Active Directory or a local backend. If you do not have or wish to use an external identity provider, you can set up Gatekeeper with local users on your AccessEnforcer itself. A Gatekeeper portal allows you to invite users from that local or external identity provider and create Gatekeeper rules for those users. Only one Gatekeeper portal can be linked to a single identity provider. Up next is the setup for various scenarios. A local backend portal. To create a local backend portal for Gatekeeper, follow these steps. Log into the AccessEnforcer and click on Security in the top ribbon and then Gatekeeper on the left side menu. Name your portal. Choose Local on Backend type. Enter end user URL. Create and confirm the enrollment password. This will be needed when you invite end users to the Gatekeeper portal. Last, save the portal. Next, let's add users to the local backend portal. To create local users for Gatekeeper, follow these steps. Log into the AccessEnforcer and click on Users in the top ribbon and then User Management in the left menu. Scroll to the Add User form at the bottom of the page. Enter the user's information. Username will be used by the user to log into Gatekeeper. The user's real name is only used for clarity. User type. Choose Local for Gatekeeper from the drop-down list. The phone number field is not currently used but exists to facilitate future SMS integration. Enter the user's email address. Enter the user's preferred password for logging into Gatekeeper as well as confirm in the next field. Click Save and continue for any additional users. That will complete the creation of the Gatekeeper local backend portal and user setup. Moving on, we will go over the creation of a Gatekeeper Active Directory portal. Gatekeeper authenticates against your Active Directory domain controller. As such, it is important to ensure that you have set up your AccessEnforcer so it can connect to your domain controller. How you prepare your domain controller depends on whether the domain controller is located inside or outside your network. If your domain controller is inside your network, for example, behind your AccessEnforcer, you will need to ensure that the DNS server is set up on Setup, Network, DNS Server so the AccessEnforcer can resolve the hostname of that domain controller. If you intend to use the IP address for your domain controller instead of a DNS name, you will not need to run the following tests. However, we recommend using the DNS name so that future versions of AccessEnforcer and Gatekeeper can verify the DNS name as part of the authentication process. Often, the local domain controller is named with a local DNS name, like this, which is only resolvable by a local DNS server. Follow these steps to confirm that the domain controller's local hostname can be resolved by the AccessEnforcer. Go to Home, then Diagnostics. Select DNS Lookup from the Diagnostic Tools drop-down list and press Go. Enter your domain controller's local hostname in the hostname IP address field and press Go. If it works, you should see the IP address of the host in the output like this. If it does not resolve, go to Setup, Network, then DNS. Ensure that the first DNS server on the list is the one that can resolve the local hostname. In most Active Directory environments for small businesses, the domain controller itself is the DNS server. After making any changes, perform the previous home diagnostic steps again to confirm that the AccessEnforcer can resolve the local hostname of your domain controller. Let's review what to do if your domain controller is outside your network. It is expected that you have a working knowledge of Microsoft Azure, its terminology, and its concepts. In addition, it is assumed that you are working with an existing directory with user accounts. After you have ensured that the general prerequisites and the Active Directory specific prerequisites listed previously are met, you are now ready to add a Gatekeeper portal for Active Directory. To set up the portal, go to Security, Network, Gatekeeper, and add a portal. You will see the following form. Name the portal for your own reference. For backend type, choose Active Directory. Enter the host name of the server. Enter the Active Directory domain of the server. Enter the base DN of the Active Directory domain. This is automatically populated after the Active Directory domain is entered. Authentication is the number of seconds before the attempt connection to the portal times out. By default, the minimum timeout is 1 second and the maximum timeout is 60 seconds. Choose the type of encryption to use when connecting to the portal. 3 options are supported: no encryption, star TLS, and the recommended TLS. The port is automatically populated. If the encryption is set to none or star TLS, the port is automatically set to 389. If the encryption is set to TLS, the port is automatically set to 636. If the encryption is set to star TLS or TLS, the following 2 additional fields will be displayed: TLS with the recommended 1.2 and the verify server certificate, which should be yes unless you're using a self-signed certificate on the server. Now let's add users to the Active Directory portal. First, traverse to Security, Network, and Gatekeeper. You will see the portal that you have set up. Click the Manage Users link on the far right of the portal list. As you can see, the user list is empty for the selected portal. Click Invite Users with the green plus icon. Enter your username and password for the Active Directory. Click Retrieve User List. Once the user list from Active Directory is pulled, select the users with the checkboxes and then click Prepare Invites. Review your selections and continue by clicking Invite Users. Now the users have been added from the Active Directory to Gatekeeper. Click the email invite link to have Gatekeeper send an email invitation to the user. You may also download this list in CSV format for your records. This will conclude the Gatekeeper video walkthrough. For more information, please go to the Calyptix website at calyptix.com and the online portal. Thank you for your support and have a great day.